since the start of the shutdown because of the air traffic controller shortage. And all of this comes just weeks before the busiest travel stretch of the year, the days before and after Thanksgiving. Joining us now is Katie Nastro, a travel expert with the website going.com. Katie, great to have you and your expertise on a day like this. So if you are one of the unlucky ones and your flight is canceled because of the FAA mandate, what should you do first if you really want to get to your destination?
The first thing that travelers need to do is act quickly. They need to make alternate arrangements in the way of what are your rebooking options. Now, the airline will typically prompt you with what flights are available and where you can rebook on. And you do have the option to choose. If you get automatically rebooked on a flight, that's great, but it might not exactly fit with your plans. You can always contact the airline to see what other options that you might want. As well as we want people to act quickly because there's not going to be an endless supply of additional seats, especially as we see fewer flights. The impacts, these flight reductions and the impacts is just going to grow as we head into next week. And we're even hearing the FAA considering cutting upwards of 15% of flights if this continues well beyond next week, which is a lot, thousands of flights to be canceled. So we want people to act quickly, and staying in touch with the airline is key.
For some perspective, I think when people hear those numbers, 15%, 10%, numbers wise, is that equivalent to like a really bad snowstorm hitting every day? Give us the equivalent.
That's a great question. On any given day, we typically see 2% of flights being canceled. That's just an average normal day. When you start ticking up into 10%, 11%, 15% is getting into that outrageous territory. Yes, we have seen some occasions where 13, 14% of flights have been outrightly canceled due to extreme weather. And we know that the system takes a while to get restarted once those occur. It's not like you can just flip a switch and trains get moving again. You know, there are crews out of place, maintenance that needs to occur. There's so many moving parts, so to speak. So it can really have lasting effects well beyond just the day of the cancellations.
And we're hearing air traffic controllers are resigning daily. So when the government does reopen, they will be operating with fewer controllers possibly. So if you have travel plans maybe down the road for Thanksgiving, what should you do?
We would advise wait and see how this next weekend, early next week plays out. You know, we hope that travel is not, well, we hope that travel is sort of moving conversations forward, and we're not going to run into the Thanksgiving holiday, because that would certainly present travel chaos for so many. And we might even see more people preemptively canceling their trip plans because they just don't want to deal with the higher likelihood that something significant will impact their travels. And so there's no clear sign of whether or not this will go into Thanksgiving, but we want people to give it a few days before they make any drastic plans. It's never a bad idea, however, to look at what your options are. Can you drive to your destination? What other flights are currently available? What types of prices are they? Can you book with points? Because those you can actually cancel day of if you don't take that flight. You just have to remember to do so.
And this is a time when passenger rights come to mind. What should travelers know?
First and foremost, if your flight is canceled or significantly delayed, that's 3 hours or more for these domestic flights, you are entitled to a refund. If you choose, you don't want to travel anymore, you're entitled to get that portion of your ticket unused back, or a rebooked flight. There is no compensation provisions that we have in the US, so I don't want people under the impression that they get money on top of a rebooked flight. You get a new flight or you get a refund, not both, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. Good information. And what about those TSA lines? I mean, there was that video from, I believe, earlier this week in Houston where it was like a 3-hour wait. How early should you be getting to the airport these days, maybe for just a domestic flight?
You know, a good rule of thumb is 2 hours. I would add a half an hour onto that, especially if you're flying out of a very busy hub. You know, we're likely to see those longer TSA lines. The longer this continues, the higher the likelihood we see those lines get longer, just because certain times of the day are going to see peak times of the day are going to see more travelers, or as they're condensed onto fewer flights. And we just want people to be aware of that. Even though there have been flight reductions, that doesn't mean that we still don't have a higher likelihood of seeing staffing callouts across TSA as well as air traffic control. So that very much is still at play and could impact your flight in the way of long TSA lines and delays.
The old cliche, pack your patience. It really matters this time. Katie, we thank you so much for joining us. Katie Nastro, travel expert with the website going.com. I'm sure we'll have more questions if this drags on into next week. We'll be right back.